You are Locked On Auburn, your daily podcast on the Auburn Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into a special crossover edition, Locked On Auburn, Locked On Kentucky. I'm Zach Blackerby, your host of Locked On Auburn, and Lance Daw, host of Locked On Kentucky. We're going to give our predictions and picks as well as what we should expect on Saturday. But Lance, I think you can say a similar thing about Auburn and Kentucky. It's like you don't know what either of these teams are going to look like drive to drive, let alone game to game.
Yeah, it's definitely been an up and down season, at least emotionally for both of our programs so far this season, Zach. It's been pretty rough. I came into the season with pretty high expectations for the Wildcats. I thought, hey, look, 5-star quarterback transfer. You've got all of these receivers back. You've got one of the best defenses in the SEC. You should be able to put together a pretty solid team. And I was sitting here saying, hey, look, 9-3, you get to pick up some big time wins. You have an outside shot at the college football playoff at the end of the day. And here we are now with some really disappointing losses on the schedule. Some of them very close, some of them blowouts to teams that Kentucky has no business losing to, in my opinion. And it's definitely been a rough season so far for both of us, Zach. I'm kind of stunned, honestly, at the halfway point that both of our teams are this bad. If you had told me that they were going to be this bad heading into the season, I would have just asked you in August, hey, when is basketball season starting? When are we getting those exhibition games? Believe it or not, we got one tonight for the Cats. So
yep, that's right. That's right. Good for you. Good for you. So as far as like Kentucky season, at least they've had an explanation point. Like going to Oxford, beating Ole Miss, everyone objectively thought that was hilarious because it is. Auburn hasn't had any sort of moment like that this season. In fact, they're trying to make Saturday that chance, that opportunity, that high point of the season, because the storyline for Auburn has been, oh, so close. You found another way to lose a football game. Unless they're running out of ways to find new ways to lose football games, eventually, like, you got to think the law of averages, if you believe in such a thing, that they'll eventually be able to put together a game. Now, the matchup of this, like Kentucky's defensive front seven is really, really good. And I think that's going to present some problems for Auburn offensively.
I completely agree. When you look at this Kentucky team, obviously, if you're going to highlight positives, that's the first thing you look at is Kentucky's front seven. They've got a few different draft picks. This is one of the most experienced teams in the SEC at this point. You also have to look, Zach, I think also at the defensive backfield. As a whole, this unit is pretty solid. But again, like you mentioned, it starts there up front, most notably with Deion Walker, Kentucky's defensive tackle. He has just been lights out so far this season, alongside a couple of different guys as well. You've got Trevon Ribka. You've got Keyshawn Silver, a former 5-star transfer out from North Carolina. I mean, you've got a really, really solid defensive front. Couple that with some what feels like 7th or 8th year seniors at linebacker in J.J. Weaver and then De'Aaron Jackson. I mean, you've got some really, really solid talent. All on top of that, somebody that I've been greatly impressed with that actually has been my Roy player of the week this week is Jamon Dumas-Johnson, Pop Johnson, as they call him. He transferred in from Georgia, arguably my favorite player on this defense, and it's pretty stacked. But Zach, when it comes to what Kentucky has done so far this season to be competitive and to kind of stay in some of these games and to eventually win that game in Oxford, it does take a heroic effort on the defensive line for Kentucky to kind of stay in these outings. And that's, I think, the biggest thing for Auburn in this matchup is trying to find ways to possibly establish the run against this team, because I don't know if Auburn's going to be doing a ton through the air against the Wildcats. So it's definitely makes for a tough matchup for Kentucky to be this bad, and for essentially to be their strength to be the one thing I think Auburn could greatly struggle with. It does make things difficult. Yeah.
The matchups of what Kentucky is good at and where Auburn has struggled, I think that could be advantageous for the Wildcats. But I mean, you could say that about both of these defenses versus the opposing offenses, right? Like, sure. I think Auburn's defense is also primed to shut down Brock Vandegrift and the Kentucky offense.
Yeah, and essentially everybody has kind of been able to do that at this point this season,
what's
right?
The number? Like, what's the number of total points do you think an offense needs to score on Saturday to win this football game?
Oh, gracious. Well, I think that most of Auburn's losses have come around that 21-point margin, right? They've lost a few games around 21, 24 points. So I'd say 27 points, 24 points is probably what an offense needs to score. And we may be sitting here saying that sounds like a lot for one of these teams, but I think that's probably where things hover. If I had to guess, for both of these, I'll say this for Auburn, that's probably the point total that they need to feel pretty comfortable about winning this game. For Kentucky, I think the answer may be a little different just because of the fact that they are just so offensively inept, but also at the same time, I think pretty strong defensively. I think that maybe Kentucky could walk into this game saying, hey, we only need 20. Against this Auburn team if we have a really good defensive performance.
Yeah. I think it's 21. Like if you told me, I was thinking about this when I was driving home to record this with you. I was thinking like, okay, if Auburn scores 21 points, because that's what they did against Missouri this past weekend, and Kentucky's defense is way better than Missouri's in my opinion. It's like if Auburn can score 21 points, I think they win on Saturday. And then if you flip that around and say, okay, Auburn allows 21 points, like I don't think that they win. Auburn scored, one offensive touchdown last week against a Missouri defense who's kind of been pushed around by some other teams throughout the conference. I just don't really know what to point at on this Auburn offense and saying like, yes, that's the mismatch. That's how they're going to capitalize on this. Like maybe you look at the wide receiver, Keandre Lambert-Smith. Can he get separation on Kentucky's defensive backs on a snap or a rep where Peyton has a little extra time to throw the football? Could that happen a few times to extend drives on Saturday? I think so. Like if you're Auburn, I think that's kind of the matchup that you may want to look at. Who's going to be the corner covering KLS on Saturday?
My assumption is that it's Jordan Lovett. I think it's either going to be him or Childress. Kentucky's had a couple of injuries in the defensive backfield, but they've had some really young players step up. Maxwell Hairston, who is Kentucky's best corner, who is going to be an NFL draft pick. He's been out for a few weeks, and JQ Hardaway has stepped up very, very solidly in his stead. So it's going to be Lovett, I think. But you could honestly see a rotation of guys. Kentucky's been pretty weird about that so far this season, as far as
yeah. And then I did a show yesterday, kind of saying, hey, Auburn needs to do more with Cam Coleman, the freshman wide receiver. If Auburn is going to beat Kentucky, I do think it's going to be through the air. I don't think they're going to be able to run the ball effectively. And what Hugh Freeze does, the way he calls the game with his RPO style of offense, like if I'm Kentucky, I'm stacking the box and I'm saying, yeah, let's go. Beat us through the air. Let's see what's going on. I mean, this is a defense, Kentucky's defense. I mean, they shut down Ole Miss. They shut down Georgia. Weirdly enough, they couldn't do it to Florida, but I don't love the matchup. I don't love the matchup for Auburn.
Yeah, and I think, honestly, Zach, we can sit here and talk about how good these defenses are and about how we expect them to shut down the opposing offense, at least to some degree, and they probably should, but that's definitely not the mentality neither of our teams should have coming into Saturday. I think that something that has plagued both of our programs so far this year, as far as offense goes, is sort of playing to not lose on offense instead of actually playing to win. And I know both these teams very good defensively, I think, in different spots, but these two teams, I think they need to come in this weekend and expect to try and throw the ball around with some success. I think they need to expect to try and be explosive because there's a lot of talent to be had in both of these receiving corps. So, but we can talk about matchups. We can talk about how good the defenses are. But man, we've got to see something. We've got to see something.
We've got to see something. And so, who do we see it from on either side of the football? That's coming up right here on this crossover edition of Locked On Auburn and Locked On Kentucky. Today's show brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Lance, can you imagine wagering anywhere other than with our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook?
Absolutely not, considering they are America's number one sportsbook. And Zach, we may get a hunch right before the game kicks off this weekend about where we feel things are heading. Right now, if I'm not mistaken, the Wildcats favored by 2.5 points at home. And that's a really fun line.
It is a fun line, and let's don't give our predictions for that yet. But I do want the over under is 42.5
under.
And I said earlier in the show, like 21 points, I think wins this game. So obviously, I'm taking the under on that as well. But Lance, I don't understand this deal. I don't understand how FanDuel Sportsbook is staying open, but you can get started today with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. It's insane. So check it out all at FanDuel.com. Thank you so much for making Locked On Auburn or Locked On Kentucky your first listen every single day. For your second listen, Kentucky folks, come check out Locked On Auburn. Auburn folks, go check out Locked On Kentucky. Learn everything you possibly can about this matchup. Lance, you're probably talking more basketball than football this week, but hey, that's all right. That's all right. So to me, we talked about how Auburn needs to beat Kentucky when Auburn has the football. I think it's through the passing game. You need somebody to step up, and that also could probably be Peyton Thorne as well as those receivers. When Kentucky has the football, we both agree that the matchup kind of favors the defense on both sides of the ball here. Who on Kentucky's offense is saying, okay, if they're going to do this, if they're going to move the ball consistently against Auburn, who is it?
I think that if you had to pick a player, and I understand when thinking of moving the ball consistently, you're probably going to lean towards more a running back, but like both of us have established, I don't know if we're necessarily going to see a ton of rushing yards this weekend from either team. So in that case, I'm going to pick Dane Key as the most important player to watch as far as consistent offense in this game. And I don't know if there's going to be a ton of consistent offense, but I like wide receiver Dane Key for the Cats to get things done. In his freshman year, Zach, he had 519 receiving yards. Last year, he had 630. He's already got 500 receiving yards so far this season, and he has been the focal point over these last several weeks. He's had a couple of 100-yard receiving games. He had one against Ole Miss. Huge performances despite a couple of really tough losses. I think that he, with his speed, with his ability to go get jump balls, we could talk about Berrien Brown as a matchup problem, but I think he is a more well-rounded receiver as far as different things he can do before and after the catch, both route running and then physicality through the catch. So I think that he will be the most important thing to look out for. If I'm an Auburn defender, I think that he will probably be the most important focal point for the team. Okay,
got it. The lack of production for Kentucky's offense this season, do you think it's personnel? Is it scheme? Is it bad O-line play? Like what's the cause of it?
It's two things. It's really, really underwhelming offensive line play, which Kentucky has just kind of seen deterioration at that position for half a decade now. And then on top of that, it is just, let me choose my words, Kit. It is very poor schematics from our offensive coordinator, Bush Hamdan. I think that what he has done, again, to reiterate what I said earlier in the show, a lot of it is playing way too conservative, and it's way too it's way too confusing, I think, as far as situationally what Kentucky wants to do, as far as like throwing checkdowns on 3rd and medium and 3rd and long. You are running the ball when you shouldn't be. You are consistently making the wrong decisions in the wrong situations, and the play calling has just been horrendous. On top of that, when the play calling has been semi-decent, Kentucky's offensive line has fallen apart. They have fallen off of a cliff, and they've got a lot of really experienced pieces across this unit, and they have just been underperforming, just flat out. So I think that as far as skill position players, I think that if Vandergriff was put in a better situation, I think that he would perform better. But it is definitely, first and foremost, in my mind, scheme. Terrible play calling, in my opinion. But what do I know? I'm just a podcast host. And then just really bad offensive line play as well.
Yeah. And I think we've seen Auburn's defensive line actually get a little bit better over the course of the season. Some of that has to do with them playing more young guys. Malik Blocton, the true freshman.
Yes.
To me, he's playing more and more over the course of it. And so to me, I think he's going to be a factor in this game, especially if kind of that's a potential mismatch in Auburn's favor. I want to see him. And then Keldric Faulk, the true sophomore for Auburn, was an underclassman that they took to SEC Media Days to represent the program. They think a lot of him, and rightfully so. He's been exceptional down the stretch this year. To me, I want to see those two guys specifically against Kentucky's offensive line. And then linebacker play has been a little spotty, I think, for the Tigers. It kind of depends on the game that you want to look at, but they've gotten a little bit younger there too, with true freshman DeMarcus Riddick. I mean, Lance, you can tell this from the record, but Auburn's season has not gone the way that they want to. So a lot of the fans are saying, okay, like, we're not going to a bowl game. So let's figure out how can we prepare for the future and learn what we've got, especially when, all right, if you're not going to a bowl game, you miss out on all those bowl practices that you typically use to prepare for spring and kind of look at the future version of what your roster is going to be. And so give them reps. That's what a lot of Auburn people are saying, myself included. Give the young guys reps. And so with that comes, I think, high ceilings and maybe lower floors just because they're true freshmen and they don't always know exactly what they're doing.
Yeah, and maybe you see some volatility on that end, at least in this game and then in future games because of that. But I mean, Auburn's got a lot of young talent. And it's not just young players. It is young, talented players. And so maybe they stand out against what has been a pretty inept Kentucky offense. I pulled up the number here. Kentucky 13th in the SEC in sacks allowed per game. They are 10th in the SEC in tackles for loss allowed per game. So maybe some of those guys are able to step up across that front seven for the Tigers and make some plays.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. Okay, what are our official predictions? What's going to happen with these two unpredictable teams on Saturday? We take a stab at it. That's next, right here on this crossover edition of Locked On Auburn and Locked On Kentucky. Today's show is brought to you by our friends at Prize Picks. Lance, can you imagine playing daily fantasy sports anywhere other than with our friends at Prize Picks?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It is the place to go to get real money sports action, Zach.
Yeah. Yep. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? If you're listening to Locked On shows, sports. Sports. You might as well make some money from it. Sign up today. You can get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed, so be sure to check that out. So you can download the app today. Use code LOCKEDONCollege. You get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 matchup. It's Prize Picks. Best way to play daily fantasy sports. Prize Picks. Run your game. Final few moments here on this crossover edition of Locked On Auburn, Locked On Kentucky. Zach Lockerby, Lance Daw here with you. We mentioned it earlier. FanDuel's line is Kentucky by 2.5. I think Kentucky wins this game. And Lance, if I had to put money on it, I would say that Kentucky covers the 2.5.
Okay. So you have no faith in your Auburn Tigers bucking trends and winning what could be a tie game.
I mean, I think just straight up prediction of like how I think the game is going to go. And it's impossible to predict what's going to happen with these two teams. We're going to take our best stab at it. I think we should kind of look at what's happened so far with Auburn every step of the way in games that have mattered this year, where with the exception of Georgia, they weren't really in that late. But you look at it, they're in a situation to either take the lead or hold on to the lead in the fourth quarter in all of these games. And what do? They put themselves in this situation, whether it's offensively or defensively, and then they get in their own way. And I can't imagine that all of a sudden changing on the road at night in Lexington. So my gut reaction is Auburn. They've shown us who they are multiple times already this season. And I'm going to guess that that's what happens again.
So
I hope I'm wrong. Gosh, I hope I'm wrong.
It's an interesting situation, I think, for both of these programs, right, Zach? Like you mentioned, a lot of what Auburn's kind of realized is kind of throwing the season to the wayside and just trying to get their young players some touches and get them more experience. But for Kentucky, a lot of people, and this is not a bit, this is not just like something that the fan base is frustrated about and then they're just going to move on. A lot of this fan base wants Mark Stoops gone. They are fed up with the performance that he has had this season.
That's crazy.
Right? That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. It's your best coach in program history, and people are legitimately saying, hey, fire him at the end of this year or let him walk and go get John Summerall. That is what the message has been for about 3 weeks now. Is
John Summerall is a dude.
He's a great coach. I'd like to have him. But he Stoops with the
that's
talent.
Just so disrespectful to what Stoops has done for Kentucky.
That's what I've continued to say is the way that he's built up this program and the talent that he's brought in and the way that we have performed over the last several seasons. If Stoops was not here, would you even be 3-4 right now? Would you ever have a chance to go on the road and beat Ole Miss. So
well, Stoops is the reason that Kentucky football fans are even upset.
Have a reason to be upset, right? So
yeah.
I'm fearful that this may end up being similar to the John Calipari situation by the end of the season. We'll see what happens, but it's games like this against a team that Kentucky comes in saying, okay, we should beat them, that you really need to beat them because you should have beaten Florida last week. You probably should have beaten Vanderbilt the week before. I think that you were as talented, if not more talented, than both of those teams. So you really got to prove it if you're Mark Stoops in this game and actually get up for some competition that's kind of on your level, which Kentucky struggled to do. I'm going to take the Cats. I think they win this game probably by somewhere between 3 and 7, whatever margin Auburn blows towards the end of the game. It's going to be somewhere between there. Like you've mentioned, Auburn has continued to struggle in late game situations. And even if they're up late, I know Kentucky offensively has challenges, but I would still take the Cats to find a way until Auburn proves otherwise.
Yeah. Did you say your score prediction?
My score prediction, I'm going to go 27-20. Let's go with
27-20. Okay, we're close. I'm saying 24-17.
Oh wait, I said under earlier. Okay, so give me 24-20 then. Yeah, I'm comfortable with that.
24-20.
Yeah, let's rock with that.
The under still doesn't hit in that situation.
Shoot, you're so right. I thought it was 45. Okay, give me. You
can change your opinion on the over under. You don't have to. You're not married to that.
I'm committed. I'm committed to the bid at this point. Give me 2017. I told our great listeners, hey, look, this is what I'm going to do at FanDuel, and that's what I'm going to do at FanDuel. So give me 2017.
Oh, that's funny. That's funny. Yeah, I mean, I can't wait to see like what version of Auburn shows up because, like, Lance, I don't think that this Auburn team is like not talented. I think they have talent on the roster. They just haven't put together a full game yet. And at this point of the season, like we shouldn't be saying that. Like I do think Auburn is better than what their record is. Is that good enough to go on the road in Lexington and do it? I don't know. I genuinely don't know.
Yeah, I think that this Kentucky team is probably a little bit more talented than their record says they are. It's just that they've had some really weird schematic issues that are just not typical for a team of this caliber. So, yeah, I think that both of our teams find themselves in a pretty similar position emotionally this weekend. It's just I think Auburn fans have had a little bit more of a rough time at the end of games.
Yeah. So we'll see what happens. Take our predictions for what they're worth. Lance Dahl, all the Auburn folks, go check out Lance Dahl and Locked On Kentucky every single day. And Kentucky folks, you can check out Locked On Auburn every single day, wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Until next time, this has been a crossover edition between Locked On Auburn and Locked On Kentucky right here on the Locked On Podcast Network.